France's national education system, the système scolaire, is a source of fascination around the world.
Some say the quality of learning is exceptional, and indeed studies show that France's over 12 million students are smart and well educated. So some say the system should be copied by other countries.
But others say the system is rigid, strict, old-fashioned. It only encourages people to be the same instead of promoting individuality.
So what is it like to really go through the French school system, and just how smart are French kids?
Grab your book bags and join us for this French Connections Plus. France's education system is highly centralized and organized.
Just like in other countries, it's divided into 3 stages. So you have enseignement primaire, primary education, enseignement secondaire, secondary education, and enseignement supérieur, higher education, a whole other kettle of fish we'll explore in another show.
Now, primary and secondary education that we're focusing on today are regulated by the all-powerful Ministry of National Education.
And the ministry's chief objective is to set the national curriculum. So that goes for public schools, of course, but also the vast majority of private schools in France.
At the primary and secondary levels, the core curriculum is the same for all students at any given grade.
The idea is for people to get an equal chance at life by starting out with the same education. Former government minister Jules Ferry is widely credited as creating the modern French school, l'école républicaine. In the 1880s, he passed laws making education free, public, and secular, laïque. Schooling today is obligatory for children between the ages of 3 and 16. If you're familiar with the Anglo-Saxon system, the names of French grades might seem confusing. Primary education is divided into 2 sections: école maternelle with grades petite section, moyenne section, and grande section, and école élémentaire, CP, CE1, CE2, CM1, and CM2. Secondary education is divided into 2 other sections: collège, middle school that goes from 6e to 3e, and lycée, high school, 3 years, seconde, première, and the final year, terminale. In France, students are mostly graded out of 20, and the system is notoriously harsh. Teachers in public primary and secondary schools are civil servants. With nearly 1 million members of staff, the Ministry of National Education is France's largest employer, and education is the government's biggest budget.
The driving philosophy behind French education is égalité. Everyone should have the same education, and that goes as far as everyone having the same handwriting.
It's funny, Genie, because this is something that foreigners tend to pick up on. French people don't really seem to notice the fact that they have the same handwriting, at least when they're little. When you grow up, you kind of grow into your own handwriting, but when you're learning how to write, there's a special kind of handwriting that you learn, and it's a special kind of handwriting that teachers use as well.
And moreover, everyone here learns to write in ink, not even in pencil.
That's right. In France, you use a fountain pen, and all your homework is handwritten. It's not written on a computer and then printed. That goes for essays in high school as well. In fact, there's a special kind of paper that you use in France that has squares, essentially, and lines that you basically have to fit your handwriting into. And this is one of many school supplies that French people take very seriously. I'm here with Liv and Savannah, 2 sisters. So Liv, you're going into CE1, the equivalent of 2nd grade, and Savannah, you're going into CM2, the equivalent of 5th grade. And you're going to show us what's in your backpack. Do you mind if I take a look?
Okay.
I actually have your list of school supplies for this year, and as you can see, it's quite long here and quite detailed.
I have my pencil cases. The first one is for pens to write with, and the second one is for colored pencils.
1, 2, 3, 4 notebooks.
An agenda to write down your homework. The pochettes.
Paper holders?
Yes.
2 folders, it's here on your list.
Yes.
It's never ending. Very colorful.
A big pack of paper.
And Liv, do you write on this kind of paper too?
Yeah. The ardoise, it's a board.
There's one thing missing though in your bag. Books, maybe?
Yes.
So on top of all this, you'll have books as well.
seems like you've got quite a heavy load for when you get to school, so good luck at school.
Thank you.
At the end of high school, French students take a state exam called the baccalaureate, or the BAC for short. Now, this is a monument of French education that's been around for more than 200 years.
And French people love to brag about the baccalaureate and just how difficult it is because it implies that French children are very smart. Now, there are three kinds of baccalaureates that you can pass. There's the professional baccalaureate that prepares you for about 80 wide-ranging professions, from cooking and carpentry and also dentistry, so many professions. You also have the technological baccalaureate that focuses on sciences and computers, and then you have the general baccalaureate as well.
The BAC has a few core subjects that everyone has to take, things like philosophy or even sports. But for those students who take that last BAC, the Bac Général, they have to choose one of three tracks.
And these are called filières in French. And you can see there are three of them here. You have the S, which focuses on sciences and math, ES, which focuses on economics and social sciences, and then you have L, which focuses on literature and the humanities and arts. And what's interesting is that here in France, there's an unsaid hierarchy between these three filières. S is considered to be the most prestigious, followed by ES, which is very good for the smart students, but perhaps not the nerds in the class. And then you have L, which is considered to be the back for slackers, which is really unfair and a complete exaggeration. But what is true is that you have to be very careful when you choose which filière you take, because in France you're put on an academic and then pretty much a career track, and it's really hard to jump tracks afterwards. So you pretty much have to decide what you want to be when you are just 16 years old.
The BAC, of course, has its critics. Some people even say it's lost its value over time, as almost everyone who takes it now seems to pass.
Well, let's take a look at the statistics. In the 1960s, 60% of people taking the baccalaureate passed, whereas these days it's closer to 90%. So a lot of people say, what in the world is the value of the baccalaureate if everyone seems to pass?
Changing the national education system, though, is a hot-button issue. Successive governments have tried to reform what's been called the mammoth. But just how hard is it inside a French classroom? Flo, you went to find out more.
Hey, Peter. Nice to meet you. So I'm joined with Peter Gumbel here. We're at the École, a school in the heart of Paris. And Peter, you've written several books about the French education system. They shoot school kids, don't they, for instance? Elite Academy, French School Without Tears. What would you say characterizes the French style of teaching?
Well, on the one hand, French schools are very demanding. They have very high standards. If you come out of a French school with the baccalaureate, the classic school-leaving exam, you're very good at lots of things. You're good at philosophy, you're good at maths, you have a good general education. On the other hand, you also have a very high failure rate. A lot of kids, almost 1 in 4, really struggle at school. And when you look into why that is, you discover quite quickly that there are important differences between the culture of French schools and the culture in many other countries, particularly in the Anglophone world. And those differences are primarily the role of the pupil and the relationship with the teacher. For example, the classic things of encouraging, of motivating, of helping kids progress and saying, you know, you can get there, which you find in English and American schools, is really quite rare here. You have much more this idea that you have to fit into a mold. In France, you play a much more passive role in the classroom as a child.
You're there to seep in information from the teacher. What consequences does this have on French students?
There's a lot of stress in the system. There's some tests by the OECD, the PISA tests, which show that French kids are more stressed than anybody else in the world about French homework, especially in maths. And overall, you can see that kids come out of French schools less willing to participate, less sure about their abilities. And this plays a role. This takes a toll on people's egos and psyches.
Now, equality is a driving force in French education, and yet there's massive inequalities within the system. What do you think this is due to?
Well, this is one of the great paradoxes of the system, in that the word égalité, equality, is actually written on the front of many, many schools around the country. And yet, when you look at the statistics, the number of kids who fail, it's particularly kids who are from disadvantaged backgrounds who do badly. And there is a sort of a perpetuation in the system, in the school system, of the class structure. So that if you come from a relatively well-off family, you're going to do relatively well in school, and if you don't, then you won't. In fact, if you look again at the OECD statistics, international statistics, you'll see that the French school system is one of the most unequal in the world.
Do you think it's possible to change the French education system?
Well, what we've seen is that over the last 20 years, there's been a realization that the system isn't working. You know, education everywhere is incredibly difficult to change. Parents and teachers have high expectations. They have memories of their own education. So changing anything is always complicated. But what's important is that the French themselves understand the system doesn't work, the failure rate is too high, it's embarrassing and more. It's seriously damaging to a society to have an education system where a quarter of the kids are failing. And so people are saying we need to change, and finally we need to get on with it.
Well, we'll have to leave it at that, Peter. Thank you so much for being on our show, French Connections Plus.
Many of you sent in questions about the French education system, starting with Robert Skelton. He says, even though France is a secular state, can parents opt to send their children to religious schools?
Well, Robert, religious schools do exist in France, and they are, of course, private. The majority of them are Catholic, but you also have Protestant, Jewish, and Muslim schools. Now, public schools, meanwhile, are, of course, secular, which means that there aren't religious classes, but students learn about religion, world religions, in a kind of transdisciplinary way through history, civics, and philosophy.
Another question now from Ewa Ev. She says, can parents choose to homeschool their kids in France?
Homeschooling does exist in France. It's very rare and it's highly regulated. In fact, families that homeschool their children are subject to inspections from the state. They have to prove that they're giving their children a proper education. And if they can't prove that, well, they can be subjected to a fine. And in some extreme cases, they can actually spend some time in jail.
Well, I guess that just shows you how seriously people take education here in France. That wraps it up for today's show. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next time when we'll graduate up to a special on higher education.
And in the meantime, please keep sending us your questions. You can tweet me at Villeminot, or you can check out our Facebook page.
And we'll see you soon for the next French Connections Plus. And don't forget your book bag.
Let's go, Genie.